Lecture 1, The Riddle of Poetry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel quite overwhelmed by the very generous injustice of Juan Marichal. But at the outset, I would like to give you a fair warning of what to expect, or rather of what not to expect from me. I find that I have made a slip in the very title of my first lecture. The title is, if I am not mistaken, The Riddle of Poetry. And the stress, of course, is on the first word, the word riddle, so that you may think that the riddle is all important, or, what might still be worse, you may think that I have deluded myself into believing that I have somehow discovered the true reading of the riddle. The truth is that I have no revelations to offer. I have spent my life reading, analyzing, writing, or trying my hand at writing, and enjoying. This is the most important thing of all, drinking in poetry, and I have come to no final conclusion about it. Indeed, every time I am faced with a blank page, I feel that I have to rediscover literature for myself, that the past is of no avail whatever to me. So, as I have said, I have only my perplexities to offer you. I am nearing 70. I have given the major part of my life to literature, and I can only offer you doubts. The great English writer and dreamer, Thomas de Quincey, wrote in some of the thousands of pages of his 14 volumes that to discover a new problem was quite as important as to discovering the solution of an old one. But I cannot even offer you that. I can only offer you time-honored perplexities. And yet, why need I worry about that? What is a history of philosophy but a history of the perplexities of the Hindus, of the Chinese, of the Greeks, of the schoolmen, of Bishop Berkeley, of Hume, of Schopenhauer, and so on. I merely wish to share those perplexities with you. I have dipped into books of aesthetics, but I had an uncomfortable feeling that I was reading the works of astronomers who had never looked at the stars. I mean that they were writing about poetry as if poetry were a task and not, as it really is, a passion and a joy. For example, I have read with great respect Benedetto Croce's book on aesthetics, and I have been handed the definition that poetry and language are an expression. Now, if we think of an expression of something, then we are landed back into the old problem of form and matter, and if we think about the expression of nothing in particular, that gives us really nothing. So that we receive respectfully that definition, and then we go on to something else, we go on to poetry, we go on to life, and life is, I am sure, made of poetry. Poetry is not alien. Poetry is, as we shall see, lurking round the corner. It may spring on us at any moment. Now, we are apt to fall into a common confusion. We think, for example, that if we study Homer or the Divine Comedy or Fray Luis de Leon or Macbeth, we are studying poetry. But books are only occasions for the poetry. I think Emerson wrote somewhere that a library is a kind of magic cabinet. It is full of dead men, for those dead men can be brought, can be reborn, can be brought into life when you open their pages. I spoke a few minutes ago of Bishop Berkeley. Berkeley, who, may I remind you, was a prophet of the greatness of America. And Berkeley wrote that the taste of the apple is neither in the apple itself. The apple cannot taste itself, nor in the mouth of the eater. It requires a contact between them. And the same thing happens to a book or to a collection of books, to a library. What is a book in itself? A book is a physical object in a world of physical objects. It is a set of dead symbols. And then the reader, the right reader, comes along and the words, or rather the poetry behind the words, for the words themselves are mere symbols, spring into life. And we have a resurrection of the word. And I'm reminded now of a poem that you all know by heart. And perhaps you may never have noticed how strange it is. For perfect things in poetry do not seem strange. They seem inevitable. And so we hardly thank the writer for his pains. I am thinking of a sonnet written more than 100 years ago by a young man in London, in Hampstead, I think, a young man who died of lung disease, of John Keats, and of his famous and perhaps hackneyed sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Now, what is strange about that poem, and I only thought about it 3 or 4 days ago when I was pondering over my lecture, is the fact that it is a poem written on the poetic experience itself. You know it by heart, and yet I would like you to hear once more the surge and thunder of its lines, of its final lines. Then felt I, like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortes, when with eager eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men